Hello, and welcome to the Washington Monthly. I'm your host, Ann Kim.
And I'm your co-host, Garrett Epps.
In this episode, a critique of abundance liberalism, the economic theory that's taking progressivism by storm.
I think they're trying to break progressivism out of a scarcity mentality. Our only point is they ain't going to get there by picking at a few convenient, unfortunate government bottlenecks. There's a lot more that needs to be done.
Our guests today are Washington Monthly Editor-in-Chief Paul Glastris and Washington Monthly Editor Nate Weisberg. They are the authors of the cover story in the latest issue of the Monthly titled The Meager Agenda of Abundance Liberals. My co-host Garrett Epps is out on break. Hi Nate, hey Paul, great to have you guys both here.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So you guys have written quite a barn burner for the latest issue of the Washington Monthly, and the target of your critique is so-called abundance liberalism, the theory that's white hot at the moment in Democratic circles, and its chief proponents are people like the New York Times' Ezra Klein and the Atlantic's Derek Thompson. In fact, they've written a book called Abundance. So for those of us who maybe are not quite so breathlessly up to date on intellectual trends on the progressive left, can you guys explain what abundance liberalism is?
Sure. So I think these guys and Abundance, which is the book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, is just one of a few books that have been coming out in this cycle that kind of take a look at the problems of modern government when it comes to transportation, energy, housing, and they really try to think of ways that government has stood in the way of increasing our supply of things like housing, healthcare, clean energy, and the like. And the problems aren't always the same, but it tends to come back to a critique of well-intended regulation at the federal or local level.
So why has this critique captured the imagination of the left now? Because I feel like regulatory reform has actually been something that the so-called New Democrats have been pounding on the Hill forever. I mean, it actually was a Clintonian prerogative to some extent with reinventing government, right? And you had OIRA with Cass Sunstein and Obama trying to get rid of regulation. Like, why now? What is different about the way they've packaged it, or what is different maybe about the messengers? What's going on that this movement has suddenly caught fire?
Well, I'm not sure the left is all that into it. I think, mainstream think tanks, donors, Democratic politicians looking for something, anything to cling to, the sense that the party has a bad brand, it's got a toxic brand. I think a lot of it, I think average people have no idea what's going on. This is very much a niche, high-end, if you're a careful reader of the New York Times, you've picked up on it. Matt Iglesias, the Substacker is a big proponent of this. There's a new book by Mark Dunkelman of Brown University. A lot of people have jumped into this. And Nate's right. The basic idea is government red tape is keeping us from realizing our dreams, providing housing that's undersupplied, allowing us to meet the challenge of climate change. We need to build massive amounts of electric transmission lines and so forth. And the idea is it is well-intentioned local zoning rules, well-intentioned environmental statutes, processes within bureaucracies that keep civil servants from being able to do their jobs well. And they're not wrong. There's a lot to what they say, but not a whole lot, right? I mean, it's true. Our argument in this essay in the Washington Monthly is that even if you did everything that they said, and we had all the reforms that they talk about, it would make only a modest dent in reaching the goal they talk about. And there's just way more that needs to be done. And they kind of avoid talking about that.
Yeah, let's delve into that critique a little bit more. I mean, you do say in your cover story that the abundance narrative does get some stuff right. You write that they are, a group of centrist thinkers, I'm quoting you guys, plotting a revival of liberalism by way of pragmatism and policy innovation. That sounds good. And you also write that they, quote, show an admirable willingness to challenge their own side. So that is good. But as you say, you also argue that their theory of change and progressive revival is incomplete. So what are the specific planks that you think are missing from the abundance narrative?
Well, here's a good example of what you just brought up when it comes to, say, their pragmatism and willing to challenge their own side. If you think of progressivism as a big thing, and as this is sort of how they present it, progressivism as something that's sort of blocking our rapid transition to green and renewable energy across the country. I think you can make an argument that certain permitting laws and environmental laws have slowed down our transition to green energy, and there have been certain groups on the left who have been unwilling to compromise with whether it's oil and gas, allowing the resumption of oil and gas drilling. But the bigger idea that progressives are to blame for blocking our green energy transition, if you slow down and you think about it for a second, is just ridiculous. I mean, who's blocking our green energy transition? It's the entire Republican Party who is opposed to a green economy and shamelessly wants to preserve the oil and gas industry. And
Let me pick up on what Nate was saying. It is true that there are environmental rules that groups and individuals have used for years to slow down and stop important projects that need to get built. Let's say electric transmission lines, and some reform of that is absolutely necessary. And in fact, 3 years ago, the majority of the Democratic Party voted for it, and as Nate implied, the majority of the Republican Party in the Senate voted against it. But even more so, those aren't the real big impediments to the building of transmission lines. The real big impediments to the building of transmission lines are monopoly regulated electric utilities and the regional transmission organizations that they control that do not want the competition from solar farms and wind farms. They make their business model is based on charging for the fuel that their fossil fuel plants produce. And they have 10 ways to Sunday to block those transmission lines. And literally you can go through, and we have almost everything that the abundance liberal crowd, the think tanks, the books, and not find a wisp of a mention of the fact that the biggest impediment is the private sector. And that's kind of a through line through our essay that, it's not that they're wrong, it's that their agenda is quite meager and misses the big picture.
So one thing that you guys and the abundance liberals do have in common, though, is kind of a pro-growth approach, right?
Absolutely.
You want the private sector to be thriving, competitive. And that to me is another tension with the traditional progressive left, who see the private sector kind of with a lot of suspicion generally.
Yeah, I think this is something to praise the abundance liberals for. I think they're trying to break progressivism out of a scarcity mentality, out of a notion that the private sector, the term late capitalism, it's all quite decadent, and we need and they're saying, look, there is amazing technology coming online that will be coming online that can diminish poverty throughout the world, that can provide, if we have sufficient energy, desalination plants that can revivify our aquifers, all lab-grown meat, all kinds of things that can make our world more prosperous, more egalitarian, and more human. And they're right about that. And that is their motivation. Our only point is they ain't going to get there by picking at a few convenient, unfortunate government bottlenecks. There's a lot more that needs to be done. These are liberals, these are Democrats, and the Democratic Party has overpromised and underdelivered a lot in recent years and decades. And we fear that this is more of that.
I'm also wondering to what extent what Elon Musk is doing with Doge undercuts the deregulatory agenda as well. I mean, Musk is the ultimate techno-libertarian, right? The whole purpose of Doge is to go there and bulldoze the entire bureaucratic apparatus and presumably all the regulations that are going with it. But people are seeing really potentially very, very negative effects of too much deregulation all at once. How do you see what's happening right now with Doge and that kind of deregulation conflicting with the goals of the abundance liberals, which presumably are more about smart regulation and smart growth and some of those other kind of revivification of some of those concepts from like the 1990s?
So we're very careful not to cast them as sort of in that Elon Musk vein, because they actually, Klein and Thompson, and as do the Niskanen Center, where a lot of it's a sort of centrist think tank where they cite a lot of their work. They do a lot of stuff on actually making the government more effective, making the capacity of the government stronger, whether it's in state departments of transportations or in the Justice Department. And, what Musk is doing, obviously, he's weakening the capacity of the government across the board. So, they're not in favor of this, but it does kind of raise the question. What we're given by our, most respected and some of the smartest political thinkers is this kind of manifesto about deregulation that, as you say, it doesn't really help us figure out how we're going to respond to this Musk onslaught.
A generous reading of their literature, most of which was written and went to press before Elon Musk became the head of Doge, was, as Nate said, it's not anti-government. It's some of the best work that they've done is in service of improving the power performance of government. And I think what they might argue is, and rightly so, because we've spent so little time on the left thinking about how to make government stronger, how to make it more efficient, how to get it to do things on time, on budget, because the public has seen so much waste, so much blown deadlines, that opened up the space for Donald Trump and an Elon Musk. I think they'd be right about that. But 2 points. One, the guy who's destroying the government is an oligarch, right? The tech oligarchs now own the media and are kissing the ring of Donald Trump. If you're not focused on the consolidation of industry behind monopolists, you're not even in the game. And there's
and that's true of the issues they care the most about.
Yeah.
Energy, housing.
Yeah. And they kind of just avoid talking about it in a weird way. And we can't really figure out why.
Well, my theory is sort of, so it's obviously, it's quite a wonky thing they're doing. These are wonks, and this is a wonky conversation. And the think tank world, there's liberal think tanks, there's center-left think tanks, there's centrist think tanks, there's conservative think tanks, there's libertarian think tanks.
There's like 1 or 2 centrist think tanks.
I guess.
Right.
Well, this Gannon Center is a good one, but there's kind of a little something in there for everyone. If you're on the right and you're interested in industrial policy, if you're shamelessly interested in the oil and gas industry, if you're, a Reason magazine type or a Cato Institute type, there's definitely stuff in there for you. And I think they've even gotten, praised by them. If you're a climate warrior, if you're someone who's worried about the cost of housing and the housing shortage, there's something for you. But so I think, they're casting a wide net in the wonk world, but who they really leave out is the sort of neo-Brandeisians like at the Washington Monthly.
It really has captured the imagination of the folks who are trying to reformulate the Democratic brand, try to come up with an alternative. Who doesn't want that? We're all about that at the Washington Monthly. We do a lot of work trying to figure that out and trying to make arguments. I really don't think this is it. I mean, welcome to the club. All ideas are welcome. But let me give you an example of why I think there needs to be a little bit of rethinking before the non-Trump forces jump on this bandwagon. One of the central premises of abundance liberalism is that local zoning laws have been weaponized by affluent, progressive people in cities like San Francisco and New York to block the building of housing. And that is having a tremendously negative effect on middle and working class folks who can no longer afford houses anywhere near these mega cities. And it's certainly true. I mean, there's no doubt about it that zoning has been weaponized, and it's hard to build housing in residential areas. And what they believe is what they call the YIMBY movement. Yes, in my backyard. And the major reform is pass legislation that allows any individual to build on his or her property a 4-flat, a 2-flat, a granny flat, more dense housing.
Yeah.
And this has actually happened in a number of places, in Minneapolis, in California, in Oregon. It's still getting started, but we now have a few years of data. And what it shows is it doesn't produce very much housing. And it doesn't produce very much housing because there's not much demand out there for apartments in car-centric residential neighborhoods. What it does do is create enormous backlash among people who don't want apartments in their suburban subdivisions.
Sure. Well, sure. Everyone's worried about their home values, right?
And if the Democratic Party decides that going after local zoning is the key to their comeback, liberals are going to be out of power for decades. That is suicide.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we can't do things with zoning. Some of these cities have lifted very, very targeted lifting of zoning restrictions on commercial, not residential property, in certain traffic corridors. So, near mass transit stops, along big commercial throughways with have a lot of bus traffic. Boom, that stuff works great. It creates a lot of housing. You see it in DC, you've seen it in Minneapolis. The prices of rents have gone down, homelessness has gone down. So the abundance liberals are right that we need some zoning reform to deal with the housing shortage. It's just that they've picked an insane way to do it.
Or they've picked no way at all. It's they're a little vague on it. So all you're left with is the idea of broad zoning reform. And it's interesting that they don't, this idea of the very targeted reform on transportation corridors has had such success, and you can measure it empirically, like Paul said, in holding down.
And by the way, the Washington Monthly has been calling for that targeted zoning reform for 15 years.
Because it helps create walkable urban communities, which is what is in the highest demand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Paula, in particular, I want to ask you this question because you worked for President Bill Clinton, and he was the master of messaging, right? That was one of his strengths and one of the reasons why he captured the presidency in 1992 after Democrats had been in the wilderness for some period of time. What do you see as the political resonance of an abundance message? Even the word abundance, does that evoke the right frame? We're thinking about the economy for Democrats, especially when Democrats have been kind of tarred with big government. Does the word abundance evoke the wrong connotations about the role of government, number one? And then number two, can you build an economic agenda around permitting reform and zoning laws?
I don't know. I'm honestly not a political guy. I'm more of a policy guy, and I've done political work as you said, in the White House, but I'm the last guy in the world to rely on for messaging and so forth.
You wrote speeches, Paul.
Well,
it's the ultimate messaging document, right?
I have a terrible record of predicting election outcomes. So, but what I think that abundance, who knows if that's the right word? I think the impulse is right. I think that the truth is we do have a capacity in this country and in this world to have growth, technology, better lives, more prosperity, more shared prosperity. And I do think that there's a kind of sense on the far left that is just pure exploitation, and on the far right that the country's too decadent to get there. There is space in the middle to revivify the American system and the American economy and take advantage of the American head start in technology, are still powerful if restrained, entrepreneurial spirit, and so forth. I just don't think permitting reform is going to get you very far. And what you need is a message that is true, that says our entrepreneurs are being crushed by consolidated markets controlled by oligarchies that are hoarding technology, blocking competition, controlling the government for their own purposes. I mean, this is as obvious as can possibly be. And like I said, I think a lot of the abundance stuff was written before we started seeing it every day in the front pages. So I don't think it's hard for Americans to understand a world in which, monopoly corporations jack up the prices of things they pay for and limit their ability to go and make their own money and their own companies and their own millions. We need a country with more millionaires and fewer billionaires. And we need policies that allow that to happen. And those policies are standard American stuff, things we've been legislating and regulating and putting in place that spread prosperity around the country for generations, really since the founding. And we've kind of gotten away from it. And there's absolutely an agenda there, but and I think they have a piece of it, these guys, the abundance people, but they're a long way from understanding the whole.
Well, Paul, you wrote a series of essays, you and colleagues wrote a series of essays in the first issue of the year, putting out some of these ideas that could form the backbone of a new progressive agenda to revivify the party. Do you want to raise a couple of those just as a reminder of the kinds of things that you would like to see put forward over the next 4 years by the left?
Sure. Well, one simple one is Medicare prices for all. If you were to require that all hospitals, doctors, insurance companies charge for any particular procedure or office visit or drug about the same price as Medicare charges, because right now we don't have a competitive system in healthcare. We have consolidated hospitals that own the insurance companies, that own the blood labs, that own the doctors' practices, charging any price they want. There is no market now anymore. That's gone. It's time for government to come in and just sort of set the price. You do that, you're going to put thousands of dollars in the pockets of the average Americans, because that means that the money that their employers were paying for their extraordinarily high healthcare costs can come down, and they can put it in their pockets as income. That's just one idea. Look, the biggest unorganized, unmarketed to group in America are the self-employed. People who they're gig workers, they're contractors, they Uber drivers. Neither party has policies or a message for those folks, and it's anywhere from 10 to 30% of the workforce, and it's the growing part of it, and it's the part that's becoming that really looks like America. It's heavily female, minority. Democrats, both parties really should be putting out policies that help these folks who lack most of the social benefits that come from employment, that are taxed poorly, and that are being, abused by tech platforms and so forth. So there's a lot out there that Democrats or Republicans who are sick of Trump can seize on. Permitting reform is one. Put it on the list, but it's just just one.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point, especially about a system that moves away from the employer-based benefit structure that really is an artifact of World War II, right? And then the tax structure kind of calcified it with the various deductions you get as an employer. But the nature of work has changed, obviously. The nature of employment has changed, and those connections, those lifelong connections with employers have changed, and our governmental and regulatory structure just have not kept up with that.
And the unions, who are big constituents of the Democratic Party, they would rather those folks become employees so that they can be unionized, but a lot of them don't want to be employees. They like the independence. They need portable benefits. They need help from being crushed by big business, and there's a whole agenda there for some party or both parties. That would be great if both parties compete for these.
And these self-employed gig workers also pay higher FICA taxes on their payroll for
right, because they have
health
to pay
insurance
both
holders.
employer share and the employee share.
Exactly.
Right, so that's like 12.6%
So
versus.
they're getting particularly crushed on healthcare, and there's a massive opportunity.
And
there.
Democrats have a good story to tell. They've done more for these folks, Obamacare being a great example. A lot of people in the gig economy wouldn't have healthcare without it, and Republicans clearly want to get rid of it. So Democrats have a story to tell, but they need more. They need to actually focus on the needs of this group and others.
And I think abundance, Paul was just talking about this. It is a good framework. We like the idea. We should have abundant supply of housing, of energy. It's just a matter of how you get there. So I think, abundance is appealing. We should have, we want abundance, but how do we get there?
Who wants scarcity, right?
Exactly. How do we get there?
Right. So what else would you guys like to see coming out of the center left intellectually, or the left intellectually, politically, over the next 4 years? What kind of opportunity do you see to remake what the Democratic Party and the progressive left stand for, and how they can better connect with the folks that they lost in the last election?
Well, that's a big question. We do address a bit of that in our essay, and the future will tell. But right now, what you're seeing is a government that is attacking itself, almost like an autoimmune disease, destroying its own capacity of its agencies to do their jobs. And it is being directed by, a member of the tech oligarchy, right? Who's literally been given the keys to the federal government to cut any way he wants. This is not going to end well. Either we're moving to an illiberal democracy and a kind of authoritarianism, which is a possibility, or, and I think this is the greater possibility, a series of catastrophic government failures, millions of people not getting their Social Security checks, bird flu sweeping the nation with a decimated CDC that can't cope. We have a story coming out in the next issue that says that Guam may be the next Pearl Harbor if China decides to attack Taiwan, which, if it's smart, probably now's a good time, given Donald Trump
listening to the president.
Yeah. Things that you can't imagine could be happening in the next few years that could really shake to the core the belief that most Americans have that, government's just who needs government? We don't need it. Let's trust the private sector. That is, I think, going to open up an opportunity for Democrats to come in and say, we need a government that works. We need to invest in it. Here's our plan. And we've laid that out in many a piece in the Washington Monthly. The contractors who dominate federal operations, one of them Elon Musk, but there's thousands of them, many of them behemoths, consulting firms that kind of run wild, spend tons of money, and we don't have federal workers with the skills and authority to manage those contractors very well. And that's what's driving a lot of the problems that the abundance liberals attribute to process problems. It really is a personnel problem. We don't have the right people in the right jobs, with the right skills, with the right authority to manage the contractors. So we need to move some of the contractors out and bring some better people in. And I think we might be coming to a point politically where that sounds pretty good to the public, because what we're trying now is going to collapse.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we don't have to hit rock bottom before we can begin the process of building back up. Well, Nate and Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Great. It was fun. Thanks for smart questions.
Take care. That's it for this week from the Washington Monthly. I'm Ann Kim, and on behalf of my co-host, Garrett Epps, thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to our channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a wonderful week.